On the coldest night of December, in front of 200 guests, the Duke of Rexford raised his glass and said the words that would follow him to his grave. "Miss Hartwell will never be a duchess. She will never be anything at all." The ballroom laughed, the candles flickered, and Clara Hartwell stood alone in the middle of it all, her chin high, her heart breaking where no one could see it. She did not cry, she did not run. But somewhere in that glittering crowd, one man quietly set down his glass. He did not laugh with the others. He simply watched her, and he never forgot what he saw. The Duke thought he had destroyed her that night. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The great house of Ashcombe had never looked more beautiful than it did that December evening. Every window glowed with golden light. Carriages lined the long drive, and inside, 200 of England's finest families drank the Duke's wine and danced beneath his chandeliers. No one knew the Duke could barely afford the candles. Clara Hartwell knew. She knew many things she was never supposed to know. That was the strange gift of being invisible. People spoke freely in front of a woman they did not see. Clara was 25, with dark hair, steady gray eyes, and hands that were always busy. For 3 years she had lived at Ashcombe as companion to the old Dowager Duchess, the Duke's grandmother, and the only person in that grand house who ever looked at Clara with kindness. "Stand straight, my dear," the old lady whispered from her chair by the fire, patting Clara's hand. "You are worth more than the lot of them, and one day they will know it." Clara smiled. "You say that every ball, Your Grace." "And every ball I am right." Clara was not a servant, but she was not a guest either. She lived in the space between, the space where poor gentlemen's daughters lived when their fathers died with nothing to leave them. Her father had once been a respected man. He had lost everything to a friend who betrayed him, and the loss had killed him. Clara never spoke of it, but she never forgot it either. Across the ballroom, the Duke of Rexford stood surrounded by admirers, laughing his loud, confident laugh. He was a handsome man of 40, and he wore his pride the way other men wore coats. He was never once seen without it. And then it happened. Thomas, the Duke's young nephew, a sweet boy of 19, an heir to everything, crossed the room and bowed to Clara. "Miss Hartwell," he said warmly, "my grandmother tells me you are the finest dancer in this house. Would you honor me?" It was nothing, a kind boy asking a kind woman for one dance. Clara hesitated, glanced at the dowager, who nodded happily and placed her hand in his. They had taken 3 steps toward the floor when the Duke's voice cut across the music. "Thomas." One word. The orchestra played on, but the people nearest them stopped talking. The Duke walked over slowly, wine glass in hand, smiling the way a cat smiles at a bird. "Thomas, my boy, you are the future of this family. You will dance with the daughters of earls tonight." His eyes slid to Clara and his smile sharpened. "Not with the help." "Uncle," Thomas said, his face going red, "Miss Hartwell is grandmother's companion. She is a gentleman's daughter." "She is a gentleman's mistake," the Duke said, and the people around them laughed nervously. He was enjoying himself now. He raised his voice so half the room could hear and lifted his glass as if making a toast. "Let me tell you all something about ambition. There are women in this world who believe that if they stand close enough to greatness, some of it will rub off on them." He looked directly at Clara. "It will not. Miss Hartwell will never be a duchess. She will never be anything at all." The laughter rolled through the ballroom like a wave. Clara stood perfectly still. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, felt 200 pairs of eyes on her, felt the years of small insults gather into this one enormous one. Thomas was saying something angry beside her. The dowager was struggling to rise from her chair, her old face pale with fury. Clara looked at the Duke for one long, quiet moment. "You are right about one thing, Your Grace," she said, in a voice that did not shake. "I will never be a duchess." Then she curtsied slowly, gracefully, perfectly, and walked out of the ballroom with her head high, while the laughter died awkwardly behind her. She made it all the way to the cold, dark hallway before her legs began to tremble. She pressed her back against the wall, closed her eyes, and let out one long breath. She would not cry in this house. She had promised herself that 3 years ago. "That," said a quiet voice, "was the finest exit I have ever seen." Clara's eyes flew open. A man stood a few steps away, half in shadow. He was perhaps 30 tall, with dark eyes and a face she did not know, and Clara knew every face that ever came to Ashcombe. He held a glass of wine he clearly had no interest in drinking, and he was looking at her not with pity, but with something far more unusual. "Respect." "You were watching," she said. "The whole room was watching, Miss Hartwell, but I suspect I was the only one watching you and not him." He set the glass down on a side table. "He humiliated himself tonight, not you. Give the room 10 years, they will remember it exactly that way." Clara studied him. His English was perfect, but there was something faintly foreign in the rhythm of it, like a melody played in a different key. "You have the advantage of me, sir. I don't know your name." The man smiled, and bowed with the ease of someone who had bowed in far grander halls than this one. "Adler," he said. "Stephen Adler, a traveler and as of tonight an admirer of courage." From the ballroom came the sound of music and laughter, the Duke's world spinning on as if nothing had happened. Neither of them could have known it then. But that night, in that cold hallway, between a woman the world called nothing, and a man the world did not know at all, something had quietly begun. Something that would one day bring the Duke of Rexford to his knees. The morning after the ball, Ashcombe woke late and heavy, the way great houses do after great parties. Servants carried out dead flowers and empty bottles. And in the small sitting room in the east wing, Clara Hartwell poured tea for the Dowager Duchess as if nothing at all had happened the night before. "You should have thrown the teapot at his head," the old lady said. Clara smiled. "Then we would have no teapot, Your Grace, and he would still be a fool." The Dowager laughed until she coughed, and Clara held her hand until the coughing passed. The old woman's hands had grown thinner that winter. Clara had noticed. Clara noticed everything. "My grandson wears his title like a crown," the Dowager said quietly, "and forgets that a crown is only metal. My husband, the old Duke, God rest him, used to say you can measure a man by how he treats those who can give him nothing." She looked at Clara for a long moment. "By that measure, my dear, you are the only aristocrat in this house." Clara looked down at the teacup. "You mustn't say such things, Your Grace." "I am 83 years old. I shall say whatever I please." What the Dowager did not say, what she never said, because Clara could not bear to speak of it, was how much she knew about the girl's past. But the past was there, all the same. It lived in the small habits Clara carried like scars. She never wasted a candle, because she remembered the winter there had been no candles. She never left food on her plate, because she remembered the year of thin soup. And she never, ever trusted a man who smiled too easily, because her father had trusted one, and it had cost him everything. Richard Hartwell had been a good man. That was the tragedy of it. A respected gentleman with a fine house, a beloved wife, and a daughter he adored. He had taught Clara French and German and Italian himself, laughing that a clever mind was the one fortune no one could steal. He was wrong about that. There was one way to steal it. When Clara was 17, her father joined his money with a friend's in a great business venture. The friend was charming. The friend was noble. The friend swore on his honor. Within a year the money was gone, and somehow, impossibly, all the debts belonged to Richard Hartwell and all the profits belonged to the friend. The papers had been signed. The law was satisfied. Her father sold the house, the horses, her mother's jewelry. Her mother died the following spring. Her father lasted 2 more years, growing grayer and quieter, until one morning he simply did not wake up. The doctor called it his heart. Clara knew better. Her father had died of a broken one. She had asked him once near the end, "Father, who was it? Tell me his name." And her father, kind, foolish, honorable to the last, had only shaken his head. "The name would poison you, my girl. Hatred is a debt that collects from the wrong person. Promise me you will build, not burn." She had promised, but she had kept his papers, a small locked box of letters and documents she had never had the heart to read, and she carried that box from position to position, house to house, the last piece of her father in the world. She could not have known, that quiet morning, how much was waiting inside it. Mr. Stefan Adler was supposed to stay at Ashcombe for 3 days. He stayed 3 weeks. The Duke barely noticed him. Adler was quiet, well-mannered, and most importantly, seemed to have money, which meant the Duke was happy to keep feeding him. What the Duke did not notice was where his guests' attention went. Stefan Adler watched the household the way a man reads a book, and everywhere he looked, he found the same woman. He saw her in the library at dawn, reading in 3 languages before the house woke. He saw her carry soup up 3 flights of stairs to a scullery maid who had a fever, a girl so far below Clara's own position that no one would ever have known or cared if she hadn't. He saw her sit with the dowager for hours, endlessly patient, letting the old woman tell the same stories again and again as if hearing them for the first time. And he saw how the house treated her in return. The Duke's guests looked straight through her. The Duke himself spoke to her only to criticize. One afternoon, Stefan found her in the library, up a ladder, fighting with a shelf of old books. "May I help you, Miss Hartwell?" "You may hold the ladder, Mr. Adler. This shelf has been trying to kill me for 3 years." He held the ladder. "You know," he said, "in my country there is a saying, you can see a person's true face in how they treat 3 things: servants, animals, and old people." Clara came down with an armful of books. "And what country is that?" Something flickered in his eyes, quick and quickly hidden. "A small one, far away. You would not have heard of it." "Try me," Clara said. "I am told I will never be anything at all, but I do know my geography." He laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him. And for a moment the careful, watchful traveler vanished, and she saw someone younger and lonelier underneath. "Elbenberg," he said at last. "Mountains," Clara said. "Silver mines. A very old royal family and the best clockmakers in Europe. My father had an Elbenberg clock. He said it was the only honest thing a rich man ever sold him." Stefan Adler looked at her for a long, strange moment, as if she had said something far more important than she knew. "Your father," he said quietly, "sounds like a man worth knowing." He was. Clara turned to the shelf so he would not see her face. The world did not agree. "The world," said Stefan, "is frequently wrong. I have seen it from more sides than most, Miss Hartwell, and I promise you, the world mistakes noise for worth all the time. It is the quiet ones who hold everything up." Clara said nothing, but that night, for the first time in years, she wrote in her old journal, "Today someone saw me." She underlined nothing. She was not a woman who underlined things. But she read the sentence twice before she closed the book. Far away in the West Wing, the Duke of Rexford sat late over his brandy and his account books, and neither of them brought him any comfort. The numbers did not lie, no matter how he arranged them. The debts were growing. The estate was bleeding. He needed money, and his eyes turned, as they had turned before, toward his grandmother's rooms, toward the old woman's private fortune, and the question of where it would go when she died. Surely to the family, surely to him. unless someone had been whispering in the old woman's ear for 3 years. The Duke poured another brandy, and by the time the glass was empty, he had convinced himself of something men like him find very easy to believe. That the quiet little companion was not kind. She was clever, that her patience was a plot and her gentleness a trap. "Well," he said softly to the empty room, "we shall have to do something about Miss Hartwell." The storm came in from the north on a Tuesday, and by nightfall it owned the world. Snow fell so thick that the stables disappeared from the windows. The wind screamed down the chimneys like something alive. The roads to the village vanished, and Ashcombe became an island, a great cold house alone in a white sea. It was the worst possible night for a man to fall ill. Stephen Adler had gone riding that morning before the storm and had come back late, soaked through, laughing at his own bad luck. By dinner he was quiet. By 9 o'clock his valet found him shaking in his chair, his skin burning to the touch. "Fetch the doctor," the housekeeper said, and then stopped, because everyone knew there was no fetching anyone. The village was 5 miles away, through snow deep enough to swallow a horse. The Duke was informed. The Duke was unconcerned. "Men catch chills," he said, not looking up from his cards. "Put him to bed, he'll sweat it out." But by midnight, Stephen Adler was not sweating anything out. He was burning like a furnace and speaking to people who were not in the room, speaking in a language none of the servants knew. It was the young maid Betsy who ran to Clara's door. Everyone in that house ran to Clara's door when things went wrong, and none of them ever wondered why. "Miss, he's raving, and cook says the fever's too high, and nobody knows what to do." Clara was already reaching for her shawl. She had nursed her mother through the last long spring of her life. She had nursed her father through 2 winters. Poverty is a hard school, but it teaches, and Clara had learned things at bedsides that no fine lady ever learns in a drawing room. She took one look at Stephen and started giving orders, quietly, calmly, and in a way that made grown servants twice her age simply obey. "Betsy, snow in basins as much as you can carry. Cook, willow bark if we have it, and honey water. Open that window 1 inch, no more. And someone bring me every clean cloth in the linen cupboard." All through the night, Clara fought the fever the only way one can, patiently, hour by hour. Cool cloths changed and changed again. Small sips of water between his cracked lips. When he shivered, blankets. When he burned, snow-cooled cloths on his forehead and wrists. Around 3 in the morning, his eyes opened bright, glassy, seeing some other place. "Don't tell my father," he whispered in English, gripping her hand with sudden force. "He'll make me come home. I'm not finished, I haven't found." "Hush," Clara said gently. "You're safe, rest." His eyes found her face, and something in them settled, like a ship finding harbor. "The brave one," he murmured. "From the ballroom, the one who didn't cry." "You should sleep, Mr. Adler." "Stephen," he said, already sinking. "My name is Stephen. Someone in this country should use it." And he slept, and Clara sat beside him in the candlelight, still holding the hand that had not let go of hers, and watched the fever break just before dawn, the sweat coming at last, the terrible heat pouring out of him, the breathing turning slow and deep and safe. She was still there when the sun came up over the snow. He recovered the way strong men do, quickly, and full of embarrassment. "I understand," he said 3 days later when he could sit by the fire, "that I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing. Anyone would have done it." "Miss Hartwell," his voice made her look up. "I have been in many houses. I promise you anyone would not have done it. Anyone did not. You did." Clara folded her hands. "Then we shall say you owe me one small debt, and you may repay it by never riding into a snowstorm again." "A small debt," Stephen repeated slowly, as if the words amused him in some way she couldn't see. "No, Miss Hartwell, I am from Elbenberg. We are famous for two things, our clocks and our memory for debts. We repay both always exactly on time." He said it lightly, but his eyes were not light at all. The trouble came, as trouble at Ashcombe always did, from the West Wing. The Duke had noticed. Of course he had noticed. His guest, his wealthy asterisk guest, the one he had plans for, asked after Miss Hartwell every day, spoke of her at dinner, called her in front of everyone the most capable person in this house. The Duke smiled at his guest and boiled inside. The next morning he summoned Clara to his study. He did not ask her to sit. "It has come to my attention," he said, examining his rings, "that you spent the night in a gentleman's bedroom." Clara went very still. "I nursed a dying man, your grace, with 3 servants present all night at the housekeeper's request." "Details," the Duke said pleasantly. "The world doesn't care for details, Miss Hartwell. The world cares for stories, and a story like that could ruin a woman like you, poof, like blowing out a candle." He smiled. "Fortunately for you, I am a generous man. I will protect your reputation, and you in return will remember what you are in this house." He leaned forward. "You are not a nurse, you are not a guest, and you are certainly not whatever Mr. Adler's foreign manners have let you imagine you are. From today you will take your meals in the kitchen. You will keep to my grandmother's rooms and the servants' stairs, and if I see you so much as speak to my guest again, you will be walking to the village with your box in your arms. Snow or no snow. Am I understood?" Clara looked at him, this man in his silk dressing gown, in his cold study, in his mountain of secret debts, and understood something she had not fully understood before. He was not cruel because he was strong. He was cruel because he was afraid. She didn't yet know of what, but fear, her father used to say, is the loudest thing in any room. "Perfectly, your grace," she said, and curtsied and left. She took the servants' stairs down. She ate that night in the kitchen, at the long scrubbed table, and the cook wordlessly gave her the best portion, and Betsy sat close beside her like a bodyguard, and no one made her explain anything. It should have felt like a defeat. Strangely, it did not. The kitchen was warm and the company was honest, and Clara had lived long enough to know which of those things was rare. But upstairs in his study, the Duke of Rexford poured himself another brandy and thought about how easy that had been. How the girl had simply obeyed . It never once occurred to him that there is a kind of person who bends like a branch in winter, quietly, without breaking, and remembers. And it certainly never occurred to him to wonder what his foreign guest would do when he noticed the empty chair at dinner. He was about to find out. Stephen Adler noticed the empty chair at dinner that very evening. "Miss Hartwell does not join us." "My grandmother's health," the Duke said smoothly, cutting his meat. "The old lady needs her more and more. Devoted creature, really," she insisted. It was a good lie. Good lies always stand next to the truth, because the dowager's health truly was failing. All through January the old lady grew smaller in her great bed, sleeping more, eating less, holding Clara's hand through the long white afternoons. Stephen was no fool. He tried twice to find Clara. Twice the housekeeper, with frightened eyes, told him Miss Hartwell was not available. He understood then that something had been done, and that his presence was making it worse for her. Then, at the end of January, a letter came from Mr. Adler. Clara learned of it from Betsy, a writer, half frozen, with a sealed letter that made the foreign gentleman go pale. Family business, he said. He would have to leave for the continent at once. He left a note for Clara with Betsy, the only safe messenger in the house. 5 lines in a strong, slanted hand. "Miss Hartwell, I am called home. I will not insult you by explaining what I have seen in this house. You see everything. I ask only one thing. Whatever happens, wherever you go, leave word for me with the clockmaker Brant on Castle Street in London. Elbenberg people, you remember, always repay their debts. Essay. Clara read it 3 times, folded it small, and sewed it into the lining of her coat. She told herself it meant nothing, a kind man being kind. But she kept it against her heart all the same. And with Stefan Adler gone, the Duke of Rexford was free. What happened next was planned the way small men plan things, carefully, and in the dark. The Duke's valet, a narrow-faced man named Croft, had served him for 20 years and had learned to do what he was told without asking why. On the first Tuesday of February, while Clara sat reading to the Dowager, Croft slipped up the servants' stairs to Clara's little room under the roof. He was inside for less than a minute. When he came out, the Dowager's pearl brooch, the famous one, the one the old queen herself had given her 50 years ago, was no longer in his pocket. It was in Clara's sewing basket, pushed down beneath the thread. The discovery was made the next morning, with an audience. The Duke insisted on it. The brooch was missing, his dear grandmother's most precious possession, and so, regrettably, every room in the house must be searched. He said the word regrettably the way some men lick their lips. They searched 3 servants' rooms first, for the look of the thing. Then they came to Clara's. She stood in the doorway of her own small room and watched the housekeeper, pale, miserable, avoiding her eyes, lift the brooch out of the sewing basket. The pearls caught the winter light. Somebody gasped. Betsy burst into tears. "Well," said the Duke of Rexford from the corridor. He had dressed for the occasion. "I have never touched that brooch," Clara said. Her voice was steady, which surprised even her. "Her Grace knows I would sooner cut off my hand." "Her Grace," the Duke said, "is a dying old woman who will be told nothing of this. I won't have her last days poisoned by her own disappointment." He turned to the gathered servants and his voice swelled with sorrowful generosity. "You will all notice that I am not sending for the magistrate. I could. Theft of this kind means prison or the boat to Australia. But I am mindful of my grandmother's misplaced affection for this woman. So Miss Hartwell will simply leave, today, without a character. Without a character, without a reference." Every servant in the corridor flinched because every servant knew what those 3 words meant for a woman alone. No respectable house would take her. No school, no shop, no family. It was not mercy. It was a slower kind of prison, and everyone knew it, including the man smiling in the corridor. "May I say goodbye to her Grace?" Clara asked quietly. "I think not. She believes you have been called away to a sick relation." It seemed kinder. He examined his rings. "You have 1 hour." Clara packed the way she had learned to pack after her father's death, quickly, without letting herself feel the room. 1 trunk, her father's box of papers, her mother's Bible, the coat with the letter sewn into the lining. At the last moment, she took out her journal, tore out a single page, and wrote a few lines. She folded the page and pressed it into Betsy's hand at the kitchen door. "When her Grace is strong enough, only then give her this. Promise me." "Miss," Betsy was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Miss, we all know you never." "I know you know." Clara pressed the girl's hand. "That is worth more to me than the brooch is worth to him." The cook filled her basket with bread and cold meat and a jar of honey, defying anyone with a look to say a word about it. Old Harris, the groom, without asking permission, brought the cart around and drove her to the crossroads himself, through the snow, in silence. When he set her trunk down, the old man took off his hat. "My father served the old Duke, miss," he said. "The real Duke. He'd turn in his grave at what this house has become." He looked at her from under his white eyebrows. "You hold your head up, miss, wherever you land." Then the cart was gone, and Clara Hartwell stood alone at the crossroads with 1 trunk, 7 shillings, and no character. While behind her, in the great glowing house, the Duke of Rexford sat down to his dinner with the good appetite of a man who has solved a problem. Above him, in the quiet of her bedroom, the Dowager Duchess asked for Clara 3 times that evening. 3 times, they told her the girl had gone to a sick aunt. The old woman lay back on her pillows and said nothing more, but her eyes, in her small, shrunken face, were suddenly very sharp and very awake, because she had not survived 83 years, 2 kings, and 1 revolution by believing the things men told her in soothing voices. Something was wrong in her house, and she intended, before she died, to find out what. London in February is not a city. It is a gray stone animal that eats the poor. Clara found a room in a narrow lodging house near the river, a bed, a chair, a window that did not quite close, and began, the very next morning, to look for work. She had everything a governess or companion could need: 3 languages, fine needlework, music, a gentle manner, and an honest face. She had everything except the one thing that mattered, a character. "And your last position?" they would ask in one cold hallway after another. "Companion to the Dowager Duchess of Rexford, 3 years. 3 years, and your letter of reference?" "I have none. The Duke and I parted badly, but if you would write to the housekeeper or to any servant in that house." And then would come the look, the dreadful, polite, closing look. Ladies did not write to servants to ask about other servants. A woman who left a duke's house after 3 years with no letter, well, one could imagine. One did imagine. Imagining was so much easier than asking. By the 2nd week, she understood that the story had traveled ahead of her, the way such stories do. A lady in Harley Street said it to her face, with the satisfaction some people take in other people's ruin. "You are the one who stole from the old Duchess, are you not?" "Oh yes, my cook heard it from a girl who knows the Rexford kitchens. You have brass, I'll give you that, showing yourself at respectable doors." "Madam, I stole nothing, The door was already closed. 7 shillings became 5. 5 became 3. Clara moved to a cheaper room, and then a cheaper one, until she was in a garret in Lambeth where the ice formed on the asterisk inside of the window, and she wore her coat to bed, Stephen's letter still sewn in the lining, though she no longer let herself take it out and read it. "Leave word with the clockmaker Brant, on Castle Street." She had walked down Castle Street once. She had stood across from the little shop with the golden clock above the door, and her hand had been in her pocket, on the folded note she'd written. And then she had turned and walked away. Because what would she say? "Dear Mr. Adler, you owe me a debt and I have come to collect it." She could hear the Duke's voice. There are women who believe that if they stand close enough to greatness, some of it will rub off. No, not that. Never that. She would starve with her head up before she would beg with it down. Her father's voice, gentler, answered from years away. "Pride is a fine coat, my girl, but it won't keep out the rain." "It's all I have left, Papa," she whispered to the frozen window. "Let me keep it a little longer." By the last week of February she had 1 shilling and 4pence, and she was hungry in the way that stops being pain and becomes a kind of grey quiet. She did sewing for a shop that paid by the piece and cheated her on the count. She wrote letters for sailors' wives at a penny a page. She grew thinner. Her coat grew looser. And then on a Tuesday morning, in a 3-day-old newspaper wrapped around 2pence worth of fish, she saw it. She almost missed it. It was 4 lines in the smallest print at the bottom of the page. "Wanted a lady of education as companion to an elderly lady of quality. Must read aloud well, speak French and German properly, and possess more sense than opinions. Liars, flatterers, and the easily frightened need not apply. Inquire at number 14, Grosvenor Square." Clara read it twice, and for the first time in weeks laughed out loud, alone in her freezing room. Liars, flatterers, and the easily frightened need not apply. Whoever had written those lines, she thought, she wanted to meet them. Number 14. Grosvenor Square was a tall, quiet house with shining windows, and the butler who opened the door looked at Clara's worn coat with an expression that said he had already sorted her into a category. "The position," Clara said before he could speak, "in the newspaper. I've come to inquire. There have been 11 ladies before you this week. Her ladyship has kept none of them longer than a quarter of an hour." He said it with a certain gloomy pride. "Name?" "Hartwell, Clara Hartwell." She was shown into a sitting room where a fire, a real fire, a big asterisk one, burned like something out of a dream, and behind a small table sat one of the oldest and most upright women Clara had ever seen. She was perhaps 90. She was dressed in black silk, wore rings on 8 fingers, and held a cane she quite obviously did not need for walking. Her eyes were pale blue and absolutely terrifying. She looked Clara over from shoes to collar. It took some time. "You are poor," the old lady said. Her accent was German, clipped and precise. "Yes, madam." "You are also hungry. Do not deny it. I have been hungry. It has a face." The old lady tapped her cane once. 11 women sat in that chair this week and told me how asterisk delightful my house is and how asterisk honored asterisk they would be. Flatterers. Tell me something true, Miss Hartwell, and be quick. Clara considered and was too tired and too hungry for anything but the truth. "Something true. Very well, madam. I was dismissed from my last position without a reference, accused of stealing a pearl brooch. I did not steal it. I believe it was placed in my room on the orders of my employer, the Duke of Rexford, because his grandmother loved me and he feared what that love might cost him. I cannot prove a word of this. Every respectable door in London has been shut in my face. You will likely shut yours too, and I have 1 shilling and 4pence in the world." She lifted her chin. "But you advertised for a woman with more sense than opinions, and it would not have been asterisk sensible to let you hear it first from someone else." Silence. The fire crackled. The terrifying blue eyes did not blink. "The Duke of Rexford," the old lady said at last, slowly, as if tasting the name. "I have met him, twice. He kissed my hand and looked over my shoulder both times to see if someone more useful had entered the room." She sniffed. "A man who is rude to old women is a man in debt, Miss Hartwell. Remember that. It is never wrong." She tapped the cane again, twice this time. "Sit down. Schmidt will bring tea and you will eat everything on the tray and not pretend otherwise. You will read to me from the newspaper, the asterisk political asterisk pages. I have no patience for weddings, first in English, then the same in German, so I can hear if your grammar is honest." The old lady settled back. "I am the Baroness von Rates. If you last the week, you will find I am difficult, exacting, and never boring. The eyes do not lie, Miss Hartwell, and yours have not lied to me once since you entered this room. That has not happened to me since Mein Gott, since before Napoleon." Clara sat. Tea came, and bread and butter and cold chicken, and she ate everything on the tray and did not pretend otherwise. That night she slept in a warm room at the top of the house in Grosvenor Square, in a real bed, with a fire in the grate. She did not know, could not have known, that the terrifying old lady 2 floors below was, at that very hour, writing a letter at her little desk. A letter in German, in a strong, slanted hand that ran in the family. It began, "Stefan." The Baroness von Rates was exactly as advertised. Difficult, exacting, and never boring. She rose at 6. She took a cold bath, which she recommended loudly to everyone and forced on no one. She read 3 newspapers before breakfast and argued with all of them. She said precisely what she thought, to precisely everyone and London society, which fears honesty the way cats fear water, adored her for it from a safe distance. And slowly, week by week, she began to rebuild Clara Hartwell. It was not done with kindness. The Baroness did not deal in kindness. It was done with asterisk work. Your French is good. Your German is better. Your posture is a disgrace. You stand like a woman apologizing for the space she occupies. Stop it. You will walk across this room 50 times with my grandmother's Bible on your head, and you will imagine it is the head of the Duke of Rexford. That should keep it steady. Clara walked. Clara read aloud politics, philosophy, the terrible poetry of the Baroness's late husband, which the old lady listened to with her eyes closed and her rings glittering. Clara learned to run a great house's accounts, to answer letters from bankers and bishops, to sit at the Baroness's side through visits from people whose names appeared in newspapers. And a strange thing happened. The doors that had slammed on Clara Hartwell, the disgraced companion, opened wide, bowing, smiling for Miss Hartwell, asterisk the Baroness von Ratz's young friend asterisk. The same door, the same city, the same woman. You see how it works now, the Baroness said one evening, watching Clara's face after a countess who had once refused her a servant's position begged her to attend a musical evening. It was never about what you are, child. It was about who stands beside you. This is the world's great shame, and the sooner you stop expecting better of it, the sooner you can begin to use asterisk it. It's monstrous, Clara said quietly. It is, the Baroness agreed, pleased. Now put on the blue silk. We are going to the opera, and you will sit in my box in the front where all the monsters can see you. In March, Clara sat in that box while below her, in the crowd, she caught sight of a face she knew. The lady from Harley Street, the one who had shut a door on her and called her a thief. The lady looked up, recognized her, and went pale, and then, this was the astonishing part, bowed her head asterisk, hopefully, hungrily, praying to be acknowledged. Clara looked at her for a long, level moment. Then she turned her eyes back to the stage. Cruel, said the Baroness beside her approvingly. Good. A little cruelty, well aimed, is a vitamin. But the strangest change was quieter than opera boxes. It happened inside. Clara caught herself laughing again. She slept without counting shillings in the dark. And one morning she realized she had walked past a bakery window without calculating what she could afford in it, and stood still in the street, ambushed by her own peace. She was, however, no fool. She knew there was a mystery in Grosvenor Square, and she was living in the middle of it. Because the Baroness von Ratz was more than an elderly lady of quality. Letters arrived for her with seals Clara had never seen, a silver tower on dark blue wax. Twice, gentlemen from an embassy called, spoke to the old lady in rapid German behind closed doors, and left looking as if they'd been spanked. And on the landing hung a portrait of a young man in a white uniform, with a sash and a star, whose face Clara found oddly familiar and could never place. My family, was all the Baroness said when Clara once looked at it too long. From home, we are an old house. And then, with a sharpness that came from nowhere, do you think of him, the foreign gentleman from Ashcombe, the one from your story, Adler? Clara's needle stopped. She had mentioned Stephen exactly once, weeks ago, briefly in the middle of the whole tale. You have a remarkable memory, madam. Answer the question. Sometimes, Clara said to her sewing. He was kind to me when kindness was expensive. I hope his family business resolved well. That is all. That is all, the Baroness repeated, dry as paper. Ja, naturally. And she smiled at her newspaper in a way Clara found deeply suspicious and said nothing more. It was a Thursday evening in April when the mystery knocked on the front door. They were at cards. The Baroness was cheating, serenely, the way she always cheated, when the butler Schmidt entered with an expression Clara had never seen on him. The man looked asterisk moved. My lady, he is here. The Baroness laid down her cards. For the first time in all those months, Clara saw her hands hesitate. Here now, the boy was not to arrive until she stopped. She straightened her back, which needed no straightening. Well, Show him in, Schmidt, don't stand there quivering. Show whom asterisk in? Clara asked, rising, smoothing her skirt, some instinct beating in her like a bird. Madam, should I leave you, if it is family? Sit, said the Baroness, down. Quick footsteps on the marble. A tall figure in a dark traveling coat, snow-damp at the shoulders. He must have come straight from the boat, straight through the rain without stopping, and then he was in the doorway and the lamplight found his face. Dark eyes, a face made for watching quietly, a voice she had last heard in a cold hallway, telling her the room would remember her exit for 10 years. Aunt, said Stefan Adler, and kissed the Baroness's hand. And then he turned and saw Clara, and the whole careful, watchful traveler's composure fell off him like the rain. For a moment nobody breathed. Miss Hartwell, he said at last very quietly, the clockmaker on Castle Street waited for you every day for 4 months. He took one step closer. You never came. Clara's voice failed her for the first time in years. I could not come asking for. I had nothing. And you, a debt is not, I did not want it asterisk paid asterisk I know, Stefan said. I know exactly why you didn't come. It is the same reason I crossed the sea in April. He turned to his aunt, who was watching them both with her terrifying blue eyes shining, cards forgotten. You wrote me she was proud, stubborn, and the most honest creature you had met since before Napoleon. I did, said the Baroness von Rates, gathering up the deck with enormous satisfaction. I never lie about important things. Schmidt, supper for 3. My nephew has come a very long way. She looked from one of them to the other, and permitted herself, at last, one small, wicked, triumphant smile. And I believe he has something to say. Supper that night lasted 4 hours, and afterward Clara could not have said what was served. What she remembered was the talk, the 3 of them around the small table, the candles burning low, the Baroness telling stories of Stefan as a boy. He fell out of every tree in the garden, always the same garden, always with dignity. While Stefan protested and laughed and looked at Clara across the flames in a way that made the room feel small. He had changed since Ashcombe. There were new lines at his eyes and something heavier in his shoulders, the look of a man who had spent months carrying something. But when he laughed, the weight lifted, and Clara caught herself trying to make him laugh just to watch it happen. Spring turned warm, and Stefan Adler became a fixture at Grosvenor Square. He came in the mornings and read the German newspapers aloud to his aunt, doing the voices of politicians until the old lady wept with laughter. He came in the afternoons and walked with Clara in the park, always properly, always with Betsy. No, with the Baroness's maid trailing behind, always in full view of the world. He asked Clara 1,000 questions and listened to every answer as if it would be on an examination. What her father had taught her. What she thought of the new poems, the old laws, the price of bread. No one had asked Clara what she thought in years. He asked nothing else, no promises, no declarations, and somehow that patience said more than declarations could. He is courting you, the Baroness observed one evening, brutally, over cards. He is kind to me, madam. I am kind to my horses. That man crossed the North Sea in storm season. She laid down a card she had certainly stolen from somewhere. But he is waiting for something, and I begin to lose patience with him. There is a thing he must tell you first. It is not mine to tell. Her blue eyes flicked up. When he does, try to remember that a man may lie about his name and still be the most honest man you know. Clara turned that sentence over for days, the way you worry a stone in your pocket. She got her answer on a gray Sunday in May in the walled garden behind the house, where Stefan had asked her to walk with him, alone this time, and the Baroness, scandalously, had allowed it, which told Clara everything about how serious the morning was going to be. He didn't speak for a full turn of the garden. Then, by the old sundial, he stopped. Miss Hartwell, Clara, I must tell you something, and when I have told you, you will be angry and you will have every right. He took a breath, like a man stepping off a cliff. My name is not Adler. Clara waited. She had guessed as much for weeks, the seals, the embassy men, the portrait on the landing whose face she had finally, quietly placed. Adler was my mother's name, he said. I have used it for 2 years traveling because my own name makes people perform. Men flatter me. Women are pushed at me like dishes at a dinner, and everyone wants something. In 2 years, exactly one person ever looked at me and saw a man instead of a door to walk through. His voice dropped. She was standing in a cold hallway, having just been publicly humiliated, and she was not crying, and she corrected me on the geography of my own country. Stefan, Clara said, say the name. He straightened, and it happened again, that thing she had glimpsed in his fever, the way something royal came into his spine without his permission. Stefan Alexander Friedrich, he said quietly, Crown Prince of Elbenberg, my father is the king. My aunt, a helpless gesture toward the house, is Her Serene Highness the Princess Augusta, who has called herself Baroness von Rates in England for 40 years because she says the full title attracts idiots. He almost smiled. That night at Ashcombe, when the fever had me, you heard me beg you not to tell my father. Some part of me knew, even then, that you were the one person in that house who could have sold my name, and never would. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere beyond the wall, London rattled on, unaware. The letter that called you home, Clara said slowly, pieces falling into place. In January. My father's health failed. It has recovered, he is strong again and twice as stubborn, but I am his only son, and I was made to understand my traveling days are ended. He looked at her steadily. I came back to England against his wishes, Clara. I came back for one reason, and she is standing in front of me, deciding right now whether to forgive me. You lied to me, Clara said, from the first evening. Yes. Every day at Ashcombe, every walk in the park. Yes. She looked at him, this man who had held her hand in a fever and called her the brave one asterisk, who had crossed a sea because an old lady wrote that an honest woman was starving in Lambeth, and she heard the Baroness's voice. A man may lie about his name and still be the most honest man you know. Then we are even, Clara said at last, because I lied to you as well. I told you I never went to Castle Street. Her voice caught. I went. I stood across the road with a note in my pocket and I was too proud to cross. So you see, Your Highness, we are both liars and both for the same reason. Neither of us could bear to be a beggar at the other's door. Stefan Alexander Friedrich, Crown Prince of Elbenberg, let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something much older, and took both her hands, and pressed them to his lips right there in the garden. Propriety be hanged. Marry me, he said. Not the prince, the man from the hallway, he asked first. And Clara, penniless, slandered, dismissed without a character, stood in the spring garden and laughed and cried at once, and said the only thing there was to say. Yes, God help us both, yes. Happiness, real happiness, has a sound. That house was full of it for 11 days. The Princess Augusta wrote triumphant letters home. Stefan wrote to his father, a long, careful, honest letter about the woman he had chosen. Clara walked through her days lit from inside, and even Schmidt the butler was seen once humming. And then, on the 12th day, the news reached a certain club in St. James's Street, where a certain gentleman sat drinking brandy he could no longer afford, hiding from creditors he could no longer avoid. The Crown Prince of Elbenberg, yes, staying in Grosvenor Square, engaged, they say, to some English girl nobody knows, a Miss Hartwell, companion to the old Baroness. The Duke of Rexford set down his glass very slowly. Hartwell. His first feeling was disbelief. His second, arriving swiftly, as it always did with him, was fear. because the Duke did a piece of arithmetic in that moment, the only arithmetic he was truly gifted at. If she rises, I fall. The thief he had invented, princess of a silver kingdom, everything she knew about him, everything she could say in courts, in palaces, in rooms where his creditors bowed and listened. That she might say nothing, that she might simply be happy and let him rot in peace, never entered his mind. Men like the Duke cannot imagine mercy in others because they cannot find the shape of it in themselves. He called for pen and paper. If the lie is big enough, he murmured in the empty writing room, and travels fast enough, the truth never catches it. He knew exactly where to send it. Kings, he reasoned, are fathers first, and no king in Europe would let his only son marry a thief. The Duke of Rexford began to write. The Duke's letter took 9 days to reach the palace at Elbenberg, and it was a masterpiece. He had written lies all his life, to creditors, to friends, to his own mirror, and this was his finest work. He wrote not as an enemy, but as a friend. A concerned English nobleman, heartbroken to perform so painful a duty, warning a fellow father across the sea. The woman calling herself Clara Hartwell, he wrote, had been dismissed from his house for stealing pearls from his dying grandmother. There had been witnesses to the discovery, a house full of them. He enclosed statements from his valet Croft, from 2 footmen whose wages he paid, all sworn, all stamped, all perfectly legal-looking. He wrote that the woman was clever, that she attached herself to the old and the trusting, and that His Majesty's son, forgive me, sire, but I was young once, would not be the first good man blinded by a soft voice and a sad story. He signed it with his full title, sealed it with his crest, and posted it with the same hands that had ordered the brooch placed in her sewing basket. 9 days later, an old king read it in his cold study, read it twice, and sent for his fastest courier. The summons reached Grosvenor Square on a beautiful morning in June. That is how these things happen, never in storms, always in sunshine, always when the breakfast is still warm. Stephen read the letter standing, and Clara watched the color leave his face. My father commands me home. His voice was very careful. Immediately, alone, he looked up. He writes that allegations have reached him concerning you, documents, sworn statements. He writes, Stephen's jaw tightened, that if I do not come and answer him, he will consider it my abdication. The Princess Augusta rose slowly from her chair, and for once she looked every one of her years. Rexford, she said, the debt-ridden man is always the first to spend on postage. I will go, Stephen said. I will stand in front of him and tell him the truth. He is hard, but he is not unjust. He raised me to believe a man's word must be worth more than his crown, and I will hold him to his own lessons. He took Clara's hands. His were cold. 3 weeks, 4 at most. Promise me you will be here when I return. And Clara, who knew better than anyone alive what sworn statements and a duke's seal could do to a woman with no name, looked into his eyes and made the second promise of her life she was not sure she could keep. Go, she said, make your father proud of you, that is all I ask. He kissed her hands and then her forehead, and by nightfall he was on the road to Dover. She held herself together for 6 days. Then the London papers found the story, as London papers always do. Not the truth is slow and dull, but the story asterisk, a prince's mysterious betrothed. Then 2 days later in a nastier paper, questions surround Miss H. The WREXFORDPEARLS. A dismissed servant's remarkable rise. Callers stopped coming to Grosvenor Square. Invitations were withdrawn with regrets, with headaches, with sudden journeys to the country. The lady from Harley Street told her tale in every drawing-room in Mayfair, and it grew teeth with each telling. Clara bore it. She had been poor. Slander was lighter than hunger. What broke her, what finally sent her, sleepless at 2 in the morning, to the bottom of her old trunk, was a single thought she could not silence. What if I truly cost him everything? She hadn't meant to open her father's box. She had only meant to hold it, the way a frightened child holds a father's coat. But the little lock, rusted by years and damp lodgings, gave way in her hands, and Clara sat on the floor of her beautiful borrowed bedroom by candlelight and finally read her father's papers. Debts, ledgers, letters begging for time, for patience, for mercy. Her mother's ring wrapped in silk that she had believed sold 20 years ago, and at the bottom a bundle tied in black ribbon in her father's writing, "For Clara, when you are strong enough. Forgive me for being weak." Inside was the story of his ruin, told in the only voice that had never lied to her. The friend, the venture, the signatures. Her father had written it all down: dates, sums, meetings, a quiet, careful record made by a man who knew he had been robbed and could not prove it. And on the third page, Clara's candle shook because there was the name. The friend who had smiled and sworn on his honor and moved every debt onto her father's shoulders and every profit into his own pocket. Rexford. Not the man she knew, the asterisk father asterisk. The old Duke, dead these 10 years, and beneath it, in her own father's hand, one last line that stopped her heart. The son knows. He signed as witness. He was 25 and he watched and he smiled and he said nothing. God forgive them both, for I find tonight that I cannot. Clara sat very still for a long time. 3 years. 3 years she had lived under that man's roof, eaten his bread, endured his insults, and he had known her name the day she arrived, known whose daughter poured his grandmother's tea. It had never been contempt for a stranger. It had been the guilty man's hatred of the living evidence, the debt walking his corridors in a mendied dress. She understood the brooch now, truly understood it, and she understood with the cold clarity that comes at the bottom of the night exactly what the sworn statements in the king's hands were worth, and exactly how this would go. Her word, a companion's word, a asterisk dismissed asterisk companion's word, against a duke's seal and 3 witnesses. Her father's papers proved a dead man's ruin, but they did not prove her innocence of the pearls. Nothing proved that. Nothing could. If Stefan defied his father for her, he lost his crown, and his country lost its heir. For a woman the whole world would forever call a thief, and if his father broke him instead, she would have watched the finest man she knew be ground down defending her, and that she could not bear. She could not win. She could only choose what her losing would cost and who asterisk would pay it. Clara Hartwell had one gift the Duke of Rexford had never understood, because he did not have it and could not imagine it. She knew how to love something more than herself. She packed the way she had packed twice before, quickly, without letting herself feel the room. Her father's box, her mother's Bible, the old coat with the letter still sewn in the lining. She left the silk dresses. They had never been hers. Nothing, she thought, had ever really been hers except her name, and even that was in the newspapers now, wearing chains. She left no note for Stefan. A note could be followed. A note could be asterisk answered asterisk, and if he answered, he was lost. Let him be angry, anger heals. Let him believe she had grown frightened of palaces. One day, with some golden princess beside him, he would be grateful. She wrote one line only, and left it on the Princess Augusta's card table, tucked under the marked deck. You told me once the world mistakes noise for worth. Thank you for being the first person since my father to hear me. C. Asterisk. Then Clara Hartwell went down the servants' stairs of the grandest house she would ever live in, and out through the kitchen door, and was gone into the gray London morning before the lamps were out. Stefan returned 20 days later, having fought his father to a bloody standstill of wills, having demanded the evidence be tested in front of him, having sworn on his mother's grave that he would sooner dig ditches than abandon an innocent woman. and found an old princess sitting very upright at her card table, holding a single line of handwriting, with tears on her terrifying face for the first time in 40 years. "Find her," said the Princess Augusta. "Find her, or neither of us deserves the names we were born with. Now we must go back to Ashcombe, to a bedroom that smelled of lavender and beeswax, where an old woman everyone had written off was refusing, with magnificent stubbornness, to die on schedule. The Dowager Duchess of Rexford had outlived 2 kings, 1 revolution, and every doctor who had ever given her 6 months. And since the February morning when they told her Clara had gone to a sick aunt, she had been doing the thing she did best. She had been listening. Old age had taken her legs and much of her sight. It had not taken one hair of her cunning. She noticed that Betsy's eyes went red whenever Clara's name was mentioned. She noticed that the servants said "Gone away, Your Grace," in the flat voice servants use when they've been told what to say. She noticed that her pearl brooch, which she had not asked to wear all winter, was suddenly, pointedly, pinned to her shawl one morning like an alibi. So one gray afternoon she sent for Betsy, alone, took the girl's hand in her thin one and said, "Child, I am 83, I have perhaps 1 winter left, and I have no time for the mercy of liars. Where is Clara?" And Betsy, who had been carrying the truth like a hot coal for weeks, burst into tears and told her everything. The search, the sewing basket, without a character, the snow at the crossroads. The Dowager sat quietly for a long moment. Those who knew her would have found that silence more frightening than any shout. "The brooch was in my jewel case in January," she said at last. "I saw it there myself the day of the ball when I chose my rubies instead. It did not walk to the girl's room." Her sharp old eyes lifted. "It was carried. Now, who in this house has hands that do my grandson's carrying?" They both knew the answer. Everyone in that house knew the answer. "Send me Croft," said the Dowager Duchess. "Tell him I am dying and wish to distribute a few keepsakes to the loyal staff. He will come at a run." What passed between the old lady and the valet took place behind a closed door, and lasted almost 2 hours. She did not shout at him. That was her genius. She had known Croft since he was a booby of 9. She had known his mother and paid for his father's funeral, and she reminded him of these things in a soft, dying voice while her eyes held him like pins hold a moth. She spoke of heaven and of courts of law in that order. She observed, gently, so gently that when ruined men fall, they let go of the servants first, and that a duke drowning in debt would hand the law his valet the way a fox gives the hounds its tail. "You have done a wicked thing, John Croft," she said at last. "But I have watched wicked things done in this family for 60 years, and I know the difference between the hand and the head. Give me the truth in writing, and when the storm comes, and it is coming, John, I can smell it like rain, the truth will be your shelter. Refuse, and you may sink with him. Choose." Croft, narrow-faced, gray, 20 years obedient, stood in that lavender-smelling room, and for the first time in his service, thought about his own neck. Then he began to talk. The Dowager's own solicitor, Mr. Penhallow, came up from the village the next day, called quietly, about her Grace's will, which surprised no one and alarmed no one, least of all the Duke, who had been waiting hungrily for that very meeting. Behind the closed door, Croft repeated his confession, every detail. The order given over brandy, the brooch taken from the jewel case, the minute in Clara's room, the pushing of pearls beneath the thread. Penhallow's clerk wrote it all down. Croft signed. 2 witnesses signed. Penhallow sealed it. "And now, Your Grace," said the old solicitor, "the will itself." "Yes," said the Dowager Duchess, folding her hands, and there was 60 years of aristocratic warfare in her smile. "Take a fresh page, Penhallow, and write asterisk slowly asterisk. I want every word of this to be enjoyed. Her private fortune, hers alone, her marriage settlement and her legacies, beyond her grandson's reach and larger than he had ever dared to dream, She left all of it to Miss Clara Hartwell in payment of a family debt. The words were chosen with care, and to her will she attached 3 documents: Croft's sworn confession, a letter in her own shaking hand telling the world what her grandson had done, and one thing more which she had carried for 10 years and shown to no one: her late husband's private ledger. For the old dowager had known, of course she had known, where her son's money had come from all those years ago, and what had been done to a trusting man named Richard Hartwell, and which of her descendants had stood witness at 25 and smiled. The knowledge had shamed her into silence for a decade. God had now been kind enough to send that man's daughter under her roof. She recognized the surname the first day, the eyes the first week, and she had done the only penance in her power. She had loved the girl. Now she could do better than penance. She could do arithmetic asterisk. "There, your grace," said Penhallow at last, sanding the page. "Though I must warn you, when this is read, it will fall upon the family like a thunderbolt." "Penhallow," said the Dowager Duchess of Rexford, settling back on her pillows with the deep, sweet peace of a general whose trap is set, "I am counting on it." She lived 4 more weeks, long enough to hear, through the Princess Augusta's answering letter, that Clara was safe, warm, and engaged to be married. She made Betsy read that part aloud 3 times, and long enough to learn, with a fury that nearly cured her, of the Duke's letters to Elbenberg. She dictated one final letter of her own that night to the King of Elbenberg, monarch to matriarch, one hard old creature to another, and enclosed a sealed copy of Croft's confession. It caught the Friday boat. Then, on a soft morning at the end of June, with Betsy holding one hand and the summer light on the window, the old lady smiled at something none of them could see and said, quite clearly, "Now I should like to watch," and was gone. The will was read in the great library at Ashcombe on the 1st of July, before the assembled family, the servants, and the Duke of Rexford, who arrived in full mourning and could barely keep the appetite out of his face. Mr. Penhallow read slowly. He had been asked to. Those present would describe the scene for the rest of their lives. The Duke's expression traveling in the space of 10 minutes, from grief to confusion to disbelief to a gray, sweating horror as the fortune went to asterisk the thief. And then the confession was read out, word by word in front of 40 people. And then the letter, and then, like the last chime of an Elbenberg clock, the old Duke's ledger, itemized, dated, damning. By nightfall it was in every servant's hall in the county. By Friday it was in the London papers, which fell upon the story with joy, for there is nothing England loves better than a proud man's fall. The WREXFORD confession. A Duchess's revenge from the grave. The innocent Miss H. The creditors, who read newspapers too, arrived within the week, all of them at once, like crows who had been waiting for a signal. And in Grosvenor Square, a footman ran up the steps of number 14 waving a newspaper, and an old princess read it standing in the hall, and then sat down on a chair Schmidt barely got beneath her in time, laughing and weeping at once in German. But the house's joy had a hole in its center. Because it was July, and no one, not Stephen, who had searched every lodging house from Lambeth to Whitekapelle, not the princess, whose letters had gone out like a flock of birds, not the clockmaker Brant, who kept his lamp lit late every night on Castle Street, no one had found Clara. She had vanished into England as only the poor know how to vanish, and she did not read the London papers. She had no idea she was innocent before the whole world, no idea she was rich, no idea that a prince had torn the city apart for her, or that, in a small coastal town 90 miles away, her past and her future were about to walk into the same tiny church. The town was called Saltmere, and it was the kind of place London forgets: a harbor, a hill, a huddle of fishermen's cottages, and a small stone church that had been standing against the sea wind for 600 years. Clara had come there because the coach fare ran out there. That was the whole story. She had taken a room above a bakery, and when the baker's wife discovered her lodger could read and write and figure accounts, Clara became, within a month, the person half the town came to. She wrote letters for sailors' widows. She taught the harbor masters' daughters their French. She kept the books for the bakery and caught 3 years of the flour merchants' quiet cheating in one afternoon. She was thinner and quieter, and she had a way of stopping in the middle of a task when a tall, dark-haired man passed the window. But she held her head up. It was, as old Harris the groom had told her at a snowy crossroads a lifetime ago, the one thing no one could take. She did not read the London papers. She could not afford them, and she would not have wanted them. Newspapers, in Clara's experience, were where her name went to be beaten. Which is why she was the last person in England to know. It was the vicar who undid everything, and he did it with a sermon. The old vicar of Saltmere had one luxury in his life. His brother in London posted him the week's newspapers, 10 days late, in a bundle tied with string. And on a Sunday at the end of July, he climbed into his 600-year-old pulpit, looked out at his fisherfolk, and announced that his sermon that day would concern * the 9th commandment, "Thou shalt not bear false witness," and that he would begin with a true story from the London papers. The story of a great duke who had borne false witness against a poor companion. Clara, sitting in the last pew with the baker's family, went very still. The vicar told it all with relish. Country vicars get few gifts like this one. The stolen brooch that was never stolen, the valet's sworn confession, the old Duchess who had set a trap from her deathbed and sprung it from beyond it, the fortune left to the innocent girl in payment of a family debt, the Duke ruined, exposed, abandoned by every friend, his estate seized by creditors, his name become a byword. And the girl, my friends, the girl they slandered, is sought this very month across all England. For she vanished rather than let her disgrace touch the man she loved, not knowing she had no disgrace at all. He stopped, because a young woman in a mended gray dress had risen to her feet in the last pew, white as the church walls, with tears running down her face in the middle of his sermon. And because the church door had opened. Afterward, the people of Saltmere never told the story the same way twice. How many riders, whose coach, whether the tall foreign gentleman had truly been on the road for 6 weeks tracing coach fares and lodging houses, and a woman who taught French to a harbor master's daughters. But on one detail every witness agreed until their dying day. The tall man came up the aisle of that little stone church, in traveling clothes with the dust still on them, past the frozen vicar and the staring fishermen. And when he reached the woman in the gray dress, he did not say one word. The crown prince of Elbenberg went down on his knees on the cold stone floor. "You left no note," Stephen said at last, and his voice cracked like a boy's. 6 weeks, Clara. I have knelt in front of my father, and I swore I would kneel in front of you next, and I am not getting up from this floor until you. He never finished the sentence. Clara Hartwell was on her knees on the cold stone too, in front of the vicar, the baker, the harbor master, and God, holding his face in her 2 rough, capable hands. "You found me," she whispered. "You were never lost," said Stephen. "You were only ahead of me, you always have been." The congregation of Saltmere, who did not yet fully understand what they were watching, but understood enough, rose to their feet and cheered in church. And the old vicar, weeping freely, declared that the remainder of the sermon could wait for a duller Sunday. They were married in September, not in Saltmere, though Stephen offered, and not in London, though London begged. They were married in Elbenberg, in the old cathedral under the mountains, because the king commanded it, and the king commanded it because of a letter. He had received 2 in the end. The first bore a duke's proud crest and was full of sworn lies. It sat now in a palace drawer, kept, the king said, to remind me what a gentleman's seal is worth. The second had come from a dying Englishwoman he had never met, monarch to matriarch, enclosing a valet's confession and one blunt closing line the old king read aloud at the wedding breakfast, to the delight of every guest. Your Majesty, my grandson tells falsehoods about this girl because he owes her family everything and cannot pay. Take her for your son before some wiser king takes her for his. Rexford, the real one. The king had summoned Clara to a private audience the day she arrived, a terrifying old man in a cold study, with his son's same dark eyes, and had questioned her alone for 2 hours about her father, her ruin, her ledgers, her opinions on 4 subjects, and her refusal twice of the money the crown offered to settle upon her before the wedding. At the end he was silent a long moment. My son crossed the sea against my orders for you, he said. I broke my health raising him to know a person's worth from their title. It is the single lesson I was never sure he learned. The old man rose and bowed a king to a companion. I am pleased to discover he learned it better than his teacher. At the wedding, the Princess Augusta, restored to her full name and terrifying in silver, cheated visibly at cards with 3 ambassadors and made Betsy, imported from England as the bride's own maid, sit beside her at the high table. Old Harris the groom was there, in a new coat, having declared he'd driven Miss Clara to one crossroads and would see her to the other. And when the crown of Elbenberg's crown princesses, 500 years old, silver from the mountains, was set on the head of a woman who had once eaten alone in a kitchen, the cathedral bells rang for a full hour. Clara spoke only briefly at the wedding feast. She had been asked to. She had refused all grandeur. She stood in her wedding dress with her husband's hand in hers and said this. Years ago, in front of 200 people, a man raised his glass and told the world I would never be a duchess. I have thought about those words in cold rooms and warm ones, hungry and fed, and I have come to a conclusion. She lifted her own glass, and the room saw that her eyes were shining and her chin was high. He was right. I never became a duchess. She looked at Stefan. I became something better. I became a woman who was loved before anyone knew her name, by an old lady who owed me nothing, by servants who risked their places for me, and by a man who knelt on a stone floor in a fishing village. No title does that. Only people do. She raised the glass higher. To the ones who see us when we are invisible, the rest, my friends, is only noise. 200 guests rose, and in the mountains of Elbenberg, they say, the toast that followed could be heard across the valley. 12 years passed. They passed the way years pass in stories that end well, quickly for the happy, and very, very slowly for the rest. In Elbenberg, the silver kingdom under the mountains, the people had a new favorite subject, and her name was Crown Princess Clara. They loved her the way people love what is theirs fiercely, and with stories. They told how she had answered the old king in perfect German the first day, and how the old king, who smiled twice a year, had smiled. They told how she went into the mountain villages every autumn without ceremony and sat in kitchens and listened, and how the schools she built took every child, the clockmakers and the shepherds alike. Because, she said, her own father had taught her that a clever mind is the one fortune no one can steal. They told how the old king in his last winter would let no one else read to him, how he died holding 2 hands, his son's and hers, and how his final words to Clara had been, "You were my best argument, child. When I meet your father, I intend to thank him." Stefan was crowned in the spring, and the woman a duke had toasted as nothing at all stood beside him in the old cathedral, while the bells rang across the valley, and became, as the reader has perhaps been counting on their fingers, not a duchess after all. A queen. There were children, 3 of them, loud and stubborn and permanently escaping their tutors, which their great-great-aunt Augusta declared was the healthiest possible sign. The Princess Augusta had refused categorically to die on anyone's schedule, and at 101 years old still cheated at cards every evening, taught the royal children to do the same. "The world will cheat you, darlings. Be prepared," and pronounced Clara's eldest daughter the most promising liar in the family after myself. Betsy, little Betsy from the Ashcombe kitchens, who had once run through a storm-dark house to fetch the only person who could help, was now Frau Elizabeth, head of the Queen's household, married to the palace's chief clockmaker, and quite the most important woman in the kingdom after the Queen herself. She still cried easily. Some things do not change and should not. Old Harris the groom had lived out his days in a warm cottage on the palace grounds, in charge of the royal stable's pensioned horses, and had died contented at 90, insisting to the end that he had known, mind you, from the moment he set that trunk down at the crossroads. And every summer, the Queen of Elbenberg went home to England. She went quietly, as she did most things. She visited a little stone church in a fishing town called Saltmere, where a very old vicar showed every visitor the exact flagstone, the exact one, Madame Asterisk, where a prince had knelt. She visited a grave at Ashcombe, the Dowager Duchess of Rexford's, which was never in 40 years without fresh flowers, because Clara paid the village a standing sum, and the village, which knew the whole story, would have done it for nothing. Ashcombe itself had passed to Thomas, the kind nephew, the boy who had once crossed a ballroom to ask an invisible woman to dance. The creditors had taken everything from his uncle, but the entailed house itself they could not touch, and Thomas, who had inherited a shell, had married sensibly, worked like a farmer, and filled the old rooms with children and dogs. He and Clara wrote to each other every Christmas. He was the only Rexford she ever wrote to, because there was one other Rexford still living. The man who had once been the Duke of Rexford lived in a cottage on the edge of a Yorkshire village, on a small annuity that arrived quarterly from a lawyer who would never say who paid it. He was 72. He had been very handsome once and very proud, and both had gone the way of the estate, the paintings, the horses, the friends. The friends had gone first, friends like his always do. They had vanished in a single season like swallows the summer the newspapers finished with him. His clubs had removed his name. His mistress had married a brewer. Croft, pardoned on the strength of his confession, had ended his days respectably as a churchwarden, of all things, and was said to have prayed for his old master every Sunday, which the old master, had he known, would have found the deepest insult of all. For a few years he had told his story to anyone in the village tavern who would listen, the true story, he said, in which he was wronged. But the village took the London papers too, and after a while he stopped telling it, because he could see in their faces that they knew, and worse than knowing, that they pitied him. Contempt he could have borne. Pity was the one wine he had never learned to swallow. So he grew silent and old and small. He kept one servant, a deaf village woman who cooked his meals and did not listen to him, which suited them both. He read the newspapers, he could not stop himself, and so he had followed, year by year, in paragraphs that never knew he was reading them, the rise and rise of a woman he had once toasted in front of 200 people. Companion, bride, princess, queen. He told himself he felt nothing. He had told himself things all his life and been believed. But on winter nights, when the wind came down off the moors and the fire burned low, the old man sometimes sat very still in his chair, and the room around him would fill up with a ballroom, candles, music, 200 laughing faces, and he would hear his own voice, young and sure and pleased with itself, saying the 14 words that had followed him, exactly as promised, all the way to the edge of his grave. She will never be a duchess. She will never be anything at all. He had spent 12 years learning what every ruined man learns too late, that the words we throw at others are boomerangs, and the harder the throw, the truer the return. The envelope came on the coldest day of December. He knew the coldest days now. His bones kept the calendar. The deaf woman brought it in with the bread, and he almost did not open it, because envelopes had meant creditors for so long that his hands still trembled at the sight of one, 12 years after the last debt was seized and settled. But this envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and sealed with dark blue wax, and pressed into the wax was a silver tower. The old man sat down slowly by his small fire, and it was a long time before he broke the seal. Inside there was no letter. There were two things. The first he recognized before his eyes had fully understood it, and his breath went out of him as if he had been struck. It was a seal ring, a gentleman's ring, old gold, worn smooth. And engraved on it was a crest he had last seen 40 years ago, on documents he had witnessed at 25 with a smile on his face. The crest of Richard Hartwell. The ring had been sold, of course, with everything else. Sold and melted, he had always assumed, like everything that man owned, like the man himself. Someone had spent years finding it. Someone had bought it back. And someone had sent it, not kept it, sent it to the last person on earth with a reason to be haunted by it. The second thing was a small card, and on it in a strong, clear hand were two lines. I forgave you long ago, not for your sake, but because hatred is a debt that collects from the wrong person. My father taught me that. You knew him once. And below, where a signature would be, no title, no crown, no flourish, just Eclaira. The old man sat by his fire with the ring in one hand and the card in the other for a very long time. The deaf woman, coming in at dusk to light the lamp, found him still there, and she would say afterward in signs to her sister that the old gentleman had been weeping quietly, the way men weep who are long out of practice, and that he had not looked destroyed. He had looked, she said, like a man who had finally been allowed to put something down. He lived 2 more winters, and the village noted, because villages note everything, that in those last 2 years the old man was different, quieter, gentler, almost courteous. He gave his newspaper to the tavern when he finished it. He touched his hat to the women. On his last Sunday he went to church, sat in the back pew where the invisible people sit, and when the plate came round he put into it a gold seal ring, which caused the vicar considerable confusion and eventually paid for the church roof. He was buried in the village churchyard under a plain stone with only his name. The name, nothing else, no title, for the titles had all gone home to strangers. Almost no one came. But the following spring, and every spring after, flowers appeared on that plain stone too, sent by the same standing arrangement, from the same quiet source that kept an old duchess's grave bright at Ashcombe. The village never learned who paid for them. The Queen of Elbenberg knew. Her father had taught her long ago in a house full of books and laughter before the world showed its teeth. Build, my girl, don't burn. She had built. And so we end where we began, on the coldest night of a December long ago, when a proud man raised his glass before 200 guests and made the only prophecy of his life that ever came true. Miss Hartwell will never be a duchess. He was right, give him that much, even the worst prophets strike the mark once. She was never a duchess, not for a single day. She was a companion who held a dying old lady's hand, a nurse who fought a fever through a snowstorm for a stranger, a dismissed servant who walked to a crossroads with her head up, a teacher of harbor masters' daughters, a wife won on the stone floor of a fishing village church, a mother, a builder of schools, a keeper of graves, including in the end her enemies. A queen, yes, but that was the smallest of her titles, and she knew it, which was precisely why she deserved it. Because the old lady at Ashcombe had been right all along, in that firelit room, years before the world caught up. You can measure every person alive by how they treat those who can give them nothing. By that measure, the only one that has ever mattered in palaces or in kitchens. Clara had become something better.